When you think of Eywa from Avatar, you probably picture a mystical, benevolent mother goddess, right? But what if that's not the whole story? What if all that magic is really just a brutal but brilliant lesson in electrochemistry? Okay, let's dive right in. The source material doesn't define Eywa as a deity. It defines her as a globally distributed consciousness. Functionally, what we're looking at is a biological supercomputer the size of a moon. And that idea, well, it reframes everything. It brings us to the one central question we're going to tackle today. Is Eywa a benevolent mother goddess, or is she the most sophisticated operating system in the entire universe? To really break this all down, we're going to look at this system architecture in 5 parts. First, Pandora's planetary computer itself. Then, its biological hardware. We'll get into Eywa's operating system, how users connect to the network, and finally, the system threats and defenses. So, let's start at the foundation with the biological hardware, the actual physical infrastructure that makes this living planet tick. Now, here's what's so incredible about this network: the speed. See, here on Earth, our trees communicate through fungal networks using these really slow chemical signals. But on Pandora, the roots are all about direct electrochemical communication. The signals move as fast as a neuron firing in your brain. I mean, that is an insane evolutionary leap. Just to put that into perspective, your brain, the human brain, has roughly 86 billion neurons. That's our baseline for the most complex structure we know of. But Eywa's root network? We're talking about a brain the size of an entire moon. The sheer processing power is, well, it's almost impossible for us to even wrap our heads around. This is the ultimate biological internet. So let's break down the actual hardware components, piece by piece. The roots themselves, they're the synapses and neurons firing signals clear across the planet. The sacred trees, like the Tree of Souls, they function like data servers, letting the Na'vi upload and download memories. And then you've got these flux vortexes. They're created by massive deposits of unobtainium and act as natural geophysical firewalls, scrambling human tech and protecting those main servers. All right, so we've talked about the hardware. Now let's get into the software that runs on top of it. Eywa's operating system, the rules of the network. Okay, so this is critical. Eywa runs this incredibly strict planetary quarantine protocol, and it's all enforced by these 3 ancient laws. You shall not set stone upon stone, neither shall you use the turning wheel, nor use the metals of the ground. Now, these aren't just primitive traditions, they are a very precise recipe to suppress an industrial revolution, something the system sees as a virus that would literally consume its host. And another core feature of this OS is what they call the Sahilu, or the bond. It's not just some spiritual thing, it is a biological firewall. It literally hardwires empathy directly into the nervous systems of Pandora's creatures and the Na'vi who connect with them. And this is where the concept gets brutally, physically real. On Pandora, you cannot casually abuse a creature when its pain is instantly transmitted into your own spinal column. It's not about making a moral choice. The system's hardware forces you into a relationship of mutual respect. The whole idea of animals as property, just gone. Okay, so we've got this massive network. The next big question is, how do you even connect to it? Let's talk about user access levels. So the access levels kind of break down like this. The Na'vi, they're your standard users. They can plug in at sacred sites, those servers, to upload and download data, like memories of their ancestors. Pandora's wildlife, think of them as integrated devices, always on, a constant, seamless connection. And then there's Kiri. She's on a whole other level. Think of her as having admin or even root access. You know, when Kiri says, "I can hear her heartbeat," she's describing this incredibly amplified connection she has. But if we stick with our system analogy, that's not just a feeling. That is direct kernel access to the planetary supercomputer. She's not just using the network, she can actually channel it. And it's a level of access that can cause her own system to crash, leading to seizures. Because it's just so much unfiltered planetary data that a single brain struggles to process it all. So, that brings us to our final section. What happens when this perfectly balanced system gets threatened? Let's talk about system threats and defenses. So you've basically got 2 major threats here. You have the Ash people, who are an internal threat. They're described as apostates, who felt abandoned by Eywa and now weaponize their connection to cause pain. It's a corruption from inside the system. And then you've got the RDA. They're an external threat, a virus from the outside that triggers a full-blown immune response. And how Eywa fights back? Well, it's fascinating. The network detects RDA tech, all the machinery, the chemical pollution as a localized infection. It registers their specific electromagnetic signatures, and then it dispatches the local fauna like a swarm of white blood cells to go and neutralize the threat. It's a full-on organic planet-wide defense mechanism in action. So how do the humans get around this? Well, that's where the recoms come in. And honestly, this is a pretty brilliant strategic move. By putting human consciousness into Navi bodies, they are essentially hacking the biological internet. Eywa's sensors just read them as native life. The animals don't automatically attack. They're literally wearing the planet's own genetic code as a disguise. And all of this, it brings us to one final, really provocative question that kind of turns the mirror back on us. If we discovered this kind of living biological network in our own backyards, a system storing the collective memory of every single living thing, would we cherish it? Or, let's be honest, looking at our own history, would we immediately try to mine the nodes, hack the network, and, sell the bandwidth to the highest bidder?